or this article said that it's the property management companies.
Yeah, I think it's a problem without an obvious solution at this point in time.
Finally, do you work with the creative genius? Is that proving difficult? We've got a panel full of geniuses here, so this could be a difficult conversation, but new research out suggests geniuses are very hard to work with. And David Robson from the BBC has dug into why of the matter, so I thought I'd spend the last 60 seconds going around the panel. What do you think makes a genius, and have you ever worked with one?
I have, yeah. I've worked with a number of them. A couple of absolutely extraordinary actors who are gifted beyond the norm. Stuart Deviney, for example, in his early days at the Court Theatre, was one of the most gifted actors I've ever worked with. Could almost eclipse what was going on in the room, and made it very difficult for other people to operate, and you could often feel quite inadequate around it as well. But yes, I've worked with a number of people I would consider.
Work with a genius?
Probably worked with a few. I think it's almost the article, the research in danger of stereotyping people who are geniuses, though. I think it's almost like they're impossibly difficult, and I suspect most of them aren't.
Hey, wonderful to have you both on. Sue, Peter, thank you very much.
Thank you, Wallace.
Chapman, back tomorrow, 3:45. Till then.
Thank you.
Whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. E Hairiaki nei, a group claiming to have hacked the Waikato DHB forwards proof of performance to media outlets. What's being threatened next, and can anything be done to protect any stolen patient information? We'll have the latest. Tai hoa on the liquor licences, a call tonight for a moratorium on any new bottle store licences. The government has hit the pause button on quarantine-free travel to Victoria from 7:59 tonight for 72 hours. The pervert who managed to get a top government job after he got caught planting a spy cam in a changing room is unmasked, finally. A tearful black cap on getting COVID and India.
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora, ko Susana Leatawa tēnei. A cyber security expert says cyber criminal gangs holding stolen private information would want to make it public if a ransom is withheld. Media outlets have received an email from a group claiming to be the cyber attackers who crashed all of Waikato DHB's IT systems, and it appears they have confidential information. The Waikato DHB says it will not be commenting. Waikato University senior lecturer Vimal Kumar says the cybercriminals will aim to amplify their message and create panic.
The attackers would like to make a lot of noise about this data, would want to try and see how much they can agitate the public on this and put pressure on the DHB.
Dr. Kumar says even if a ransom were to be paid, there is no guarantee cybercriminals would not on-sell confidential data. Quarantine-free travel with Victoria will be paused for 72 hours from 8 o'clock tonight because of community cases in Melbourne. New COVID-19 restrictions are being imposed there after confirmation of a fifth case linked to an outbreak in the city's north. Here's our political reporter Katie Scotcher.
The Melbourne cluster involves close family members spread across 3 households in the city of Whittlesea. Contact tracers are racing to identify the source of the cluster and isolate all their contacts. New restrictions will apply to homes and in public places. New Zealand will pause the travel bubble while the source of the infection is investigated. Anyone back here who was at any of the locations of interest in Melbourne at the specified times should contact Healthline for further advice. Ātui te whare parimata ko Katie Scott Churaho.
Samoa's Attorney-General has filed a complaint with the Supreme Court claiming yesterday's swearing-in of the Fast Party was unconstitutional. The Supreme Court heard it for mention this afternoon and set down a hearing for Thursday at noon. Jamie Tahana reports.
The Attorney-General named the Fast Party leader, incoming Prime Minister Fiame Naomi Mataafa, all of its MPs and their lawyers as respondents. In a statement last night threatening action, the Attorney-General's office said those who conducted the swearing-in ceremony had no legal authority. But today, FAST was maintaining that it is now the government. It has a majority and was forced to act by the head of state and parliamentary officials, defying the Supreme Court. Tuilea Pasailele Maliele Ngaoi isn't backing down either. Today, again calling the FAST Party's actions a coup. Ko Jamie Tahana aho.
The former chief executive of a Crown agency used his job to keep his identity secret, despite pleading guilty to making an intimate recording. Philip Barnes, who planted a camera in an Auckland gym's changing rooms, told the court if he was publicly identified, it would affect the country's pandemic response. Veronica Schmidt reports.
Philip Barnes can finally be named today, 3.5 years after he videoed 6 people naked or partially clothed. A district court judge suppressed his name, saying there could be severe consequences for the country after he argued his job at International Accreditation New Zealand, known as IANZ, was crucial to the COVID-19 response. But the High Court and Court of Appeal disagreed, and the Supreme Court refused to hear another appeal by Barnes. The Accreditation Council, which governs IANZ, says it was unaware of Philip Barnes's crime or court arguments until last year, and he has now resigned. Ko Veronica Schmidt, aho.
Auckland's mayor is vowing to avoid infrastructure issues like Wellington water pipe woes and points to rates increases as a way of doing this. Today, the Supercities Council voted to increase rates by a one-off 5% hike next year, followed by yearly 3.5% increases until 2031. The increases are part of its 10-year budget, which includes infrastructure investment of nearly $32 billion. The Mayor Phil Goff says this includes a bump for infrastructure maintenance to avoid the capital's burst pipe plight. He says infrastructure renewals go unnoticed until something goes wrong. It's 4.5 minutes past 5. The Black Caps cricketer Tim Seifert broke down in tears as he recalled how lonely he felt after testing positive for COVID-19 while in India. Seifert was just hours away from flying home following the cancellation of the IPL competition earlier this month when he was told he had contracted COVID-19. He eventually arrived back in New Zealand late last week and is now in managed isolation in Auckland. After an initial negative test, Seifert says he developed a cough, which he put down to asthma, as he felt fine otherwise.
The New Zealand boys and other overseas players, they all got another test done. They all were negative, and they were managed to go home. And that was kind of when it all sunk in, really, is when everyone left. And I was the only overseas player basically still left in India out of the whole tournament.
The Breakers continue their tour of Aotearoa when they play the Adelaide 36ers in Christchurch in their ANBL basketball match. Both teams are out of playoff contention and the 36ers are on a 4-game losing streak. Tonight's game is the first of 3 this week for the Breakers. They play Illawarra Hawks on Friday in Pukekohe and the Brisbane Bullets on Sunday in Auckland. Line judges will no longer feature at the US Tennis Open after the United States Tennis Association decided it would use the electronic line calling system Hawkeye on all courts at this year's final Grand Slam. That's the news.
A power struggle in Samoa.
The rule of law has been stomped on by the caretaker government. It is a bloodless coup.
Fighting for rugby rights.
The ownership of New Zealand rugby should stay in New Zealand. Majority of Kiwis think they own the All Blacks, and they do.
And conflict over Wellington's vigilante cycleway.
This is a form of protest, a way of saying to the council, look, we need this cycle lane built, and this is how we're going to do it if you're not going to build it for us.
It's a showdown. Morning reports, weekdays from 6 on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Northland, Auckland, Coromandel Peninsula, Bay of Plenty, Taupo and Taihape. Partly cloudy, the odd shower for Great Barrier Island and eastern parts of Northland, Coromandel and Taihape. Southeasterlies strong in exposed places. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay mostly cloudy with occasional showers. Southeasterly strong in exposed places. Waikato to Kapiti, including Waitomo and Taumaranui. Mainly fine, some cloudy periods in Manawatu and Kapiti. For Wellington and Wairarapa, cloudy periods, isolated showers clearing from Wellington tonight and Wairarapa tomorrow morning. For all the South Island except Fiordland, generally fine, some cloudy periods about coastal Marlborough, frosty tonight, a few areas of morning cloud or fog tomorrow. Fiordland, cloud gradually increasing, late drizzle about the fiords tomorrow, and Chatham Islands, fine spells. RNZ National. It's coming up to 7.5 minutes past 5.
Thanks, Susanna. Tēnā koutou katoa, no mai haere mai ki Checkpoint e tēnei rā. This is Checkpoint, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. A group purporting to be responsible for the cyber attack on the Waikato DHB has emailed RNZ saying it has personal information of patients and employees. The email, which RNZ has sent on to police, says it gave the DHB 7 days to respond. It says without the group's help, the DHB will have to restore the network completely. Andrew McRae reports.
Media organisations were sent the email last night, and the cache of material appears to include hijacked information. The chief executive of the DHB, Kevin Snee, says the DHB is constrained by what it can say.
We can't comment. It's a matter of police investigation, we're aware that public commentary can be monitored by the Malicious Actor, so we won't be commenting any further.
Kevin Snee says incident response, investigation and remediation is ongoing.
A number of cybersecurity experts working with us and the police who are investigating and making sure all leads are followed.
He says a plan's in place if private medical information becomes public.
So in these circumstances, it's good practice to work with experts in the field, and we're working with a company to make sure that all measures are taken by the DHB to protect patients and staff who may have had their privacy breached.
The police say they're aware of the email and it's being assessed. A cybersecurity expert says cybercriminal gangs holding stolen private information would want to make it public if a ransom is withheld. Waikato University's senior lecturer Vimel Kumar says pressure will be on the DHB to retrieve the information, but that begs the question on how much the hackers can be trusted.
That they will not make copies and they will just delete all the data once they have the ransom. The attackers would like to make a lot of noise about this data, would want to try and see how much they can agitate the public on this and put pressure on the DHB.
He says the cyber hackers can sell the data to other cyber criminals, and that can then be used to scam the victims.
So you're getting an email or you're getting an actual mail with somebody trying to pretend to be someone and knowing a lot of information about you because they got all that information from that data breach.
He says either way, if you pay a ransom or not, there's no guarantee the data will be secure. The DHB says current and former patients need to be very wary of unsolicited communications claiming to be from the DHB. Cancer patients requiring radiation treatment are being sent to private hospitals in Tauranga and Wellington for treatment. Hospital and Community Services Director Chris Lowry says there's concern from clinical staff about how they will handle new referrals into the system. She says this may include sending patients to other DHBs and possibly to Australia.
So the clinical teams are raising that as an option. We just need to make sure that we have worked through ensuring that we can use all available space within other cancer centres without displacing any of their patients before we then look at that, and that would certainly then be looked at from a national perspective.
Kevin Snee denies the DHB is in any way playing down the situation with its failed IT system.
Whilst the service has coped and people have gone above and beyond, actually there are issues that are emerged the longer this goes on. Cancer's a particular set of circumstances that we need to address. Obviously all of our services are not working as normal, and we think it's important that people understand this, that these services are trying really hard to deliver the best possible care for patients in very difficult circumstances.
The DHB says while its main phone numbers are now operational, callers can expect delays or call dropouts and should keep trying. In Hamilton for Checkpoint, ko Andrew McRae tēnei.
Reporter Phil Pennington has been looking at the documents sent to RNZ and joins me now from our Wellington studio. Phil, first off, are there any clues to whether this is genuine or not?
Well, good evening, Lisa. Yes, there are clues. There are many files here. There are at least 14 random PDFs, 4 folders, and many files, dozens of files within those. From looking through them, and I must stress, we are looking at a high level. We are not going into detail. We are looking to see if these are genuine. But they do contain letterheads, staff numbers, names. It would be a very big exercise indeed to fake something like this. It does appear that they do have sensitive patient information. A lot of this dates from recently, 2021, and as I say, there is a lot of it.
And the cover note, is there any active threat there? Have they offered timeframes or clues as to what their intentions may be?
Well, we have, as you mentioned, the 7-day deadline, which was today, and they say here that they have deleted most of the backup. They say we attacked the DHB, and they say they are giving them one more day. So it's a difficult situation. We don't want to give too much air to them.
And in terms of Radio New Zealand, obviously we've received this information. What have we done with it?
Well, we have opened it, isolated it. It's not online. It's in a separate computer. As I say, we're very much limiting how many staff can see that, only to about 2 or 3. We are not going to go into the details about that, but I can run you through about some of what we've got here. As I say, in terms of patient information, there is a lot of sensitive stuff here. In terms of staff information, there are contracts and complaints. There is correspondence involving Kevin Snee, the CEO. Then there is some random material, including what appears to be a list of a lot of bank account numbers to do with the DHB and how they get paid. Just to run you through some of that patient material we have here, for instance, a file about one patient that has a list of the costs associated with their care, listing medicine, cost by cost. We have cardiac diagnoses. We have charts to do with heart rates, to do with the patients. We also have billing, organised alphabetically. There are a couple of screenshots with hundreds of names associated with them. There are customer names, what are called class names, and this includes some sensitive bank account information.
And criminal checks, Phil?
There are some criminal checks here too. There is a criminal check, and there is also a corrections department record, only one of those. The criminal record of one person's dated from 2020, and 4 pages of that. And as you say, some criminal checks as well. So there's some quite disturbing stuff here. In terms of staff, there are job offers to at least 2 staff, and those include the salary level. Also a long employee list, things such as event logs where staff are registering complaints, and there's even transcripts of some of those interviews between them. So there is, as I say, an awful lot of detail here to go through. In terms of the correspondence with Kevin Snee, there are 5 letters here where he is talking to the likes of the Ministry of Health and to John Tate of the Perinatal Review Committee. There's a spreadsheet here showing research trials in renal oncology, donating the DHB name. I don't think there are any patient names there, and talking about payments. So at least you can see it covers a wide range of things. There are names, there are numbers, there are phone numbers, there are addresses. There is a great range of material, and as you have pointed out, some quite off-centre stuff for DHBs with a corrections record there and criminal history.
Is there a direct threat to release the information?
Well, looking at what the email that RNZ received, that does say addressed to the DHB. We give them one more chance to contact us. They say that with their help, the DHB could have restored this within 1 day. They decided to ignore us, they say they cannot use their backups. So there does seem to be a deadline there.
Thank you, Phil. That is Phil Pennington, our reporter in Wellington, who's been looking at those documents that appear to have come from the group responsible for the cyber attack at Waikato DHB. And just to update you with that situation, RNZ did notify the police that they had received this email and forwarded the information on to the police. We've also been in contact with the Privacy Commissioner, and the Commissioner's office says it's up to the police to decide whether the information is genuine. In the meantime, it is providing support and advice to the Waikato DHB. It is almost 17 minutes past 5 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Still to come on the program, does Samoa actually have a government right now? The National Māori Authority is demanding a nationwide halt on licences for new bottle stores after multiple highly publicised assaults in Auckland and Wellington CBDs. Māori wardens patrolling the CBD say they're seeing multiple vicious alcohol-fuelled attacks every weekend in downtown Auckland. Our reporter Nick Trubridge and cameraman Nick Monroe have the story.
It is getting worse. We need to do something about it very quickly.
Thomas Henry has seen some ugly, ugly scenes on the streets of central Auckland. Punches and kicks raining down, knockout blows and people being rushed to hospital emergency rooms.
There's so much injury that's happening in and around the CBD because it's all around the binge drinking and all that, and how access and how freely that you can get the alcohol from around the CBD area, because there's so many liquor stores around the place.
I'm walking off Fort Street in Auckland CBD onto Fort Lane. Now, this is one area that police say is a hotspot when it comes to alcohol-fuelled violence. It was just last year, one night in 2020, when multiple fights broke out along this area. One person was knocked unconscious, and the people who patrol these spots say nothing's changed.
If you've had a night out in central Auckland, chances are you've walked past Thomas Henry patrolling the CBD with his fellow Māori wardens. He says every weekend his team come across alcohol-fuelled violence. This year, media have covered multiple blindside punches and gang attacks resulting in injuries like broken legs and spinal and facial damage.
I think there's too many scenes I've seen, especially in the CBD, fueled by alcohol. There's been breakouts of fights, you just name it, there's a lot of stuff that's happening.
Mr Henry describes a sort of turf war developing on Auckland central city streets late at night. He says big, violent groups stick together and are on the lookout for anyone they don't like coming too close.
It is bad. It is bad. We need to do something about it. We need to stop. I think there's enough liquor stores now that we've got in the Auckland central area. And even in South Auckland.
Figures provided to Checkpoint show 565 new on licences and off licences were approved in Auckland City between May 1 last year and April 30 this year. The number was 608 the year before. Council says it can't differentiate between new approvals for businesses that have been sold and those that are completely new operations, but the figures give at least some idea of how many alcohol outlets are being licensed. Take a walk through Auckland CBD and you'll see just how easily accessible booze is. On Upper Queen Street between Karangahape Road and Merrill Drive, the main drag into Auckland's downtown, there are 4 bottle stores within 400 metres of each other. National Māori Authority Chairman Matthew Tukaki says he wants a moratorium on the issuing of new licences, particularly bottle stores.
Auckland Central, for example, we're seeing young people hiring Airbnb places, renting short-term accommodation for a weekend, getting liquor and fueled up, and all of a sudden causing absolute havoc on our streets. But more importantly, that violence is starting to lead to injuries and harm, and we're also seeing an increase in that harm being mortal.
The National Māori Authority says there are more than 14,000 booze outlets in New Zealand. That's roughly one for every 350 people. Mr Tukaki says that's more than enough.
I mean, when you have a look at it, 495 million litres of alcohol sold in New Zealand in 2020 alone, 293 million litres of beer, 112 million litres of wine, 89 million litres of spirits. That equates to 100 or thereabouts litres on average between every man, woman and child in the country.
The authority is starting engagement with communities on the Liquor Licensing Act and whether a complete overhaul is needed. It's also looking at what sorts of prevention campaigns need to be run, including looking at a ban on alcohol-related advertising in sport.
I've walked those same streets on Friday and Saturday nights, and I can tell you that the way that young people are getting themselves into blues with each other and blues with others is absolutely astounding.
In a statement to Checkpoint, New Zealand Police says it has alcohol harm prevention officers working in every district to monitor liquor licences and reduce harm. But they say they can't reduce alcohol-related offending or antisocial behaviour alone, calling for personal responsibility. As for changes to the Licensing Act, NZ Police says it supports anything that'll prevent alcohol-related harm. And changes could soon be on the way, for Auckland at least, where the council's provisional local alcohol policy, which is currently under appeal, provides a temporary freeze on off licences in the CBD for 2 years. For Checkpoint, Nick Trubridge.
For more on this, I'm joined by Dr. Nikki Jackson, who's the Chief Executive of Alcohol Health Watch. Kia ora, Nikki. So the National Māori Authority wants a moratorium, particularly on off licences. Do you agree?
Absolutely, and this is what the research shows, that off licences are associated with a range of harms: sexual violence, motor vehicle accidents, you name it, property damage. Look, absolutely right, the Auckland local alcohol policy started the appeals process in May 2015, so we've just passed the 6-year limit on this appeals process, and now it's to be heard at the Court of Appeal. We would have had a moratorium on off licences if we'd adopted this policy back in 2015 without an appeals process.
So the thing is, in terms of the alcohol policy, right, there are all sorts of things that the council can do through that policy. It can ring-fence certain areas that have higher risk factors that need to be considered, whether you should have high density near schools or marae or similar. Why aren't these policies working?
Well, what's happened is that this is one of the only social policies within councils that has this appeals process. So, and it's been used vigorously by the alcohol retailers. So 86% of all local alcohol policies have been appealed by the supermarkets and 72% by the bottle stores. So Christchurch gave up in the appeals process after spending more than $1 million, through these appeals processes. Hamilton gave up. Auckland doesn't have one. Wellington doesn't have one. So our major urban centres are still not protecting their communities from alcohol harm. We're advocating for this appeals process to go.
So, Nikki, are you saying that the alcohol lobby has so many financial resources, there's just no stopping them getting their way?
Oh, it's an unlevel playing field, absolutely. So, and it's been mainly the supermarkets that have driven these appeals. And most councils around the country don't have the resources to go. In Auckland, we had a 4-week hearing in court. Now, other councils don't have the resources to do that. So the majority of them have avoided the court hearing and have negotiated behind closed doors to compromise on a local alcohol policy. And it's ended up being watered down to such an extent that it really just maintains the status quo of harm.
But a moratorium doesn't change people's habits, does it? So what do we do about that?
Well, it stops the growth of new licences, and I think communities would, they deserve a break. They shouldn't have to, object to all of these licences. What we actually need is we're at saturation already, and so we actually need to reduce the number of licences in our neighbourhoods. So we need measures in place that bring in sinking lid policies, so we can actually, the pendulum has swung way too far. We need to bring it back, and let's reduce the numbers in our communities.
Nikki, do we actually have an accurate picture? Because if you look at those figures that were given to us by Auckland Council, you don't know how many liquor licences have dropped off, what are replacement licences, whether a business has changed hands or a business is entirely new. So how accurate do you think the picture is?
Absolutely, and we would, welcome the Ministry of Justice collecting good data around this. You've got to think about this is our most harmful drug, so we should know when retailers are opening or when they're closing their doors. We do know from the Auckland District Licensing Committee that there were no new off licences refused last year, so they do report on the number of applications and the number declined. So it's just impossible for communities to fight this in the absence of a good local alcohol policy. They have to take days off work. They need to front up, hopefully, with a lawyer if they can afford that, and then go against the alcohol applicants who are all, got all the resources at their disposal.
So what is the right number of licensed outlets?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's going to be different for different communities. We know that deprived communities experience more harm per drink then more advantaged communities with the same drinking patterns. That's a phenomenon that occurs around the world. So we need extra protections in our deprived communities. We would like to see some protection around, cumulative impact of licences in these deprived communities. That needs to be there. And then you've got other factors that come into play, transportation networks and things like that. We're definitely calling for a reduction in licences, particularly in our deprived areas, and we would need to work out what level that needs to get to.
So you don't have a number yet?
No, we want at our disposal council's ability to look at these licences and have more criteria in which to refuse them. At the moment, the criteria to object to a licence is just an impossible threshold for communities to reach, and that's why we're not seeing licences refused.
Appreciate your time this evening. That's Dr. Nikki Jackson, who's the Chief Executive of Alcohol Health Watch. Homai o whakaaro, really interested in your views on that. You can text us on 2101. Should there be a moratorium on new liquor licences, and how hard is it to fight a licence if you're in the community? Let us know if you've had experience with that. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. A man who planted a spy camera in an Auckland gym's changing rooms was promoted to CEO of a Crown entity that played a crucial role in the COVID response after his offending took place. Philip Barnes wanted his name in the name of International Accreditation New Zealand, known as IANZ, kept secret. But the Supreme Court has refused to hear his case, meaning this afternoon his identity could finally be revealed. Veronica Schmidt has been investigating the case, which has rolled on for 3.5 years. She told me his workplace claimed to be unaware of Barnes' offending.
He was general manager at IANZ when he went to that gym on 4 different days at least and stuck a camera underneath the sink. He caught a naked couple on camera as well as 4 other people changing in various states of undress. Then a woman spotted the camera and she contacted the gym, who contacted police. So that was in November 2017. Now, police investigated and found videos and stills of his victims on the camera, but also footage of Philip Barnes slipping into the changing room to retrieve the camera.
So he caught himself on camera committing the crime?
He did. And so after he'd retrieved that camera, he'd go and sit in his car in the car park at the gym and look at what he'd managed to get on video. So shortly after that victim spotted the camera, the police turn up at IANZ's office in Auckland here in Ellerslie, and it's a work day, so the staff are all there. The police present a warrant and they search Philip Barnes' office. They ask about his USB storage devices and they leave with his computer. And I've seen court papers that show police informed the organisation that they were there because they were investigating a hidden camera in a gym changing room.
So the key question is, why would they promote him then, knowing, well, at least that?
So I've spoken to Llewellyn Richards. He was the CEO of IANZ at the time. He says he asked Philip Barnes what was going on and he was left with the impression that Barnes hadn't done anything and the police were just ruling out suspects. He says he thought Barnes had simply been in the wrong place at the wrong time. But I've spoken to some other former colleagues of Barnes and they say it was quite clear something was going on with him. They say he lost weight, he was disappearing from work for hours at a time, and that he was a shadow of his former self. But he was allowed to stay on as general manager, and then last year he was promoted to CEO with a salary of $250,000.
So, just so I've got this clear in my head, the boss at the time did make inquiries, but only of Philip Barnes himself, and then took Philip Barnes' word for what the situation was.
That is what that CEO says. Now, the Accreditation Council, which governs IANZ, they say a full investigation was done, but that Barnes denied it. So they use more formal language, but say the same thing.
Okay.
Yes.
So Barnes' case was still before the court, right? So how did he keep what he had done under wraps?
Well, he actually used that promotion to CEO to help keep his name suppressed. So he was made CEO at the beginning of last year. That was in the middle of New Zealand first battling COVID-19. And IANZ gives accreditation to laboratories, and those labs were suddenly under massive pressure to process coronavirus tests. And Philip Barnes applied to the District Court for a new name suppression order, arguing he had this new CEO role and he was critical to the country's pandemic response. Now, I should mention Barnes knew what he had done. He'd pleaded guilty to making a visual intimate recording. But District Court Judge Claire Bennett suppressed his name, and she later gave him permanent name suppression and discharged him without conviction. She said he'd done community service, 190 hours of it, he'd seen a therapist, and IANZ's work was, and I quote, crucial to the fight against COVID-19, and naming him would have, quote, severe consequences for the country.
So, at what point does this Crown entity discover what he has done?
Well, he was sentenced in June last year, and at that point the New Zealand Herald published a story about his case. And they didn't name him, he still had name suppression, but they described him as a high-level government manager and said this high-level government manager had stuck a camera in a gym changing room. And it was at that point that the chair of the Accreditation Council, his name is Paul Connell, read the story and alarm bells went off for him. And he asked Philip Barnes, "Are you the man in the story?" And I've seen the email that Barnes sent back to him, and he just refused to confirm or deny it. He said the story was not relevant to him or IANZ. So soon after, though, the police announced they would appeal. So they appealed both his discharge without conviction and the name suppression, and it's then that Barnes finally resigned. He said he had health problems.
Okay, so let's, jump ahead to now. What's Philip Barnes had to say for himself?
Well, he released a statement yesterday when he knew that his name suppression would lapse. He said that everybody made mistakes, that none of us were immune from them. He realised his was big, but he hoped that, I think the words he used were the community that he had long served would have some understanding and forgive him. He apologised to his wife and his family and also to his former colleagues.
What about the victims?
He said that he had apologised for his behaviour many times in court already, and he spoke of the victims saying that they had the protection of the court and that he had pursued name suppression all the way to the Supreme Court for other people, that it was never about him, that it was not about keeping his name quiet, but making sure the people around him weren't hurt.
Veronica Schmidt there, and you can read her full investigation into Philip Barnes on rnz.co.nz. Kia ora e te iwi e haere ake nei e a checkpoint, the fatter rates bill coming down the pipes for Aucklanders. An emotional Tim Seifert on his run-in with COVID in India. And all aboard, workers say new hope has been breathed into Dunedin's Hillside Railway Workshop. Homai o whakaaro, love to hear from you on anything that's been on the programme this evening. What do you make of the situation at the Waikato DHB? Are you affected by that? Do get in touch. You can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or send us an email, checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Also keen to hear your views on whether we've got enough off licences and establishments with liquor licences. Please get in touch. It is time now for the headlines with Susanna.
A group claiming to be responsible for last week's ransomware attack on the Waikato DHB has emailed RNZ saying it has personal information of patients and staff, including financial details. In the email, the group says it's already given the DHB 7 days to respond and it now has just one more day. It says without the group's help, the DHB will have to restore the network completely. Meanwhile, the Waikato DHB says cancer patients may have to go to Australia for treatment because the cyber attack has put radiotherapy equipment out of action. Those needing radiotherapy are currently being sent to private hospitals in Tauranga and Wellington. New Zealand will pause the travel bubble with Victoria for 72 hours while the source of a community cluster in Melbourne is investigated. New COVID-19 restrictions are being imposed there after a fifth case was linked to an outbreak in the city's north. Anyone back here who was at any of the locations of interest in Melbourne at the time specified is advised to contact Healthline. Samoa's Supreme Court has set down for Thursday the hearing of a complaint by the Attorney General, claiming yesterday's swearing-in was unconstitutional. The Attorney General named the Fast Party leader and incoming Prime Minister, Fiame Naomi Mataafa, as well as all of the party's MPs and their lawyers as respondents. The head of a Crown agency who planted a spy camera in an Auckland gym's changing room convinced his employer he was innocent even after police searched his office. International Accreditation New Zealand went on to promote Philip Barnes to chief executive, and he used his position to gain permanent name suppression. That has now been lifted after an appeal to the Supreme Court was denied. Auckland's mayor says rates increases are a way of avoiding infrastructure problems such as Wellington's burst water pipes. The Super Cities Council today voted to increase rates by a one-off 5% hike next year, followed by yearly 3.5% increases until 2031. Its 10-year budget includes infrastructure investment of nearly $32 billion. Those are the latest news headlines on RNZ National. Our next news and weather update is at 6.
Thanks, Susanna. No mai hoki mai. If you're just joining us, this is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. Now, let's go to the traffic news now before we get to business. A serious crash has closed Great North Road near the intersection with Glenview Road and Hepburn Road in the Auckland suburb of Dunedin. Auckland Transport is warning of long delays while police complete their investigation, so do be careful if you're in the area. The intersection is Glenview Road and Hepburn Road on Great North Road. And it is time now for business news, and Nona Peltier joins me in the studio. Nona, let's start with Refining New Zealand. So they are moving towards being an import-only terminal, and they're a step closer, you reckon?
Yes, they just did a big deal with Z Energy, which is their biggest customer. It's also a shareholder in the company. Z owns about 15%. The other shareholder is BP. They have a 10% stake, and they did a deal with the refining company in February. So the only one they really still have to talk to is Mobil, who is also an owner in the company, and what they own 17%. But Z is the biggest customer, and so getting the deal with Z is really important, and that's what they're going to be offering up for all of the customers, the same kind of deal. And what will end up is that Refining New Zealand will get about $95 million a year from Z, and that deal will help it, from all of its customers, about 95 million, which will help it survive, I guess, because the refinery is older. They're looking at what else they might do with it. It's going to mean that there will be job losses, about 100. And, of course, there'll be some savings once it's no longer a refinery. So the market quite liked that they could finally strike this deal, and the share price ended up 7% today.
Okay, let's go to Turners now. Now, this is the car company, right? Finance and insurance company. And it's, delivered a strong profit. So is everyone rushing out post-COVID and purchasing car? Or what's the deal?
Well, okay, so yes, the car pieces are doing well. So the company has used car business. You know, people remember Turners Auction, that sort of thing. They also have a finance business, an insurance business, and a credit recovery kind of business where they go after bad debts. So
right, debt collection.
Yeah, that's right. That didn't do so well because a lot of the companies, the corporates that were owed money, put that piece of their business on hold through the COVID just to give their customers a break. So that's going to come back to business as usual. In the meantime, revenue was down, and that's partly because it didn't sell as many cars. However, profits were up, and the reason why is that used cars are selling for a better profit margin than they have been in the past. And that's because there's a shortage of used cars. And the reason there's a shortage is because new cars are suffering from supply chain issues. There was a story recently about semiconductors that are used in the vehicles. They're not necessarily available. And so people are wanting to buy new cars. They're waiting. They can't sell their existing vehicle in the meantime. So that's causing used cars to become a little bit pricier. And Turners expects that to last for between 12 to 18 months. But their result was a record, $27.5 million. That was an increase of 36%. Their margins are never been better. They said the company has probably never been in a better position than it is now. And certainly the market's like that because their share price rose 4% today.
Okay, let's do a quick, trot around the markets, shall we?
Right, so our top 50 index, in fact, dropped today, 108 points. That was nearly 1% to 12,341. There is kind of like a mixed reaction going on in Asia because people are still a little unsure about where inflation's heading. There was some positive news out of the United States that helped drive the dollar down because it sort of eased inflation fears, and that helped our New Zealand dollar. We rose 72.3 US cents to 93.1 Australian and 50.9 British pence. Interesting day on the markets.
Thanks, Nona. Nona Paltier with Business. Samoa's two main political parties remain at loggerheads, with both parties claiming to be the government. And legal challenges continue to mount, many more are asking just how might this end. Jamie Tahana reports.
Whiamei Naomi Mataafa, the leader of the Fast Party, signing her oath as Prime Minister in a marquee on the front lawn of Parliament last night. It wasn't her plan, but when the party which had the majority from last month's election arrived to find the doors of Parliament locked, this is, they say, what they had to do. After the ceremony, the Fast Party says it is now the legitimate government of Samoa, but so does its opponent. Human Rights Protection Party leader and Prime Minister of 23 years, Tuilaepa Sailele Malie Lingaoi, today still insisting he's not going anywhere.
One of them became the clerk. Another took upon themselves the authority and duties of the head of state. That is what you call a coup.
Tuilaepa referring there to the swearing-in ceremony. There were no members of the HRPP there, nor was the judiciary, the clerk and speaker of Parliament, or the head of state. But Fast's deputy, incoming Prime Minister Tuala Te Vanga says they were left with no choice because those officials chose to ignore the Supreme Court.
The head of state and also the Council of Deputies, as well as the clerk of the House, they were supposed to be there. But they didn't. They defied court orders. So as far as we're concerned, we formed the government within the 45 legal days, and we do have a government.
Today, the legal wrangling continued. Whiamei and 3 of her MPs appeared in court on a private prosecution brought by Tuilaepa, which stemmed from the election campaign. Not guilty, they pleaded, calling it a political move that will go nowhere. Then the Attorney-General brought a case against all Fast MPs and their lawyers to the Supreme Court, claiming yesterday's swearing-in was unconstitutional. Tuilaepa sticking to his guns too, in an hour-long broadcast calling Fast treasonous, calling the judiciary biased. Then, minutes later, asking them to wait for his appeal against a decision last week over a quota for women, which handed Fast its majority.
I am the leader of the government, and I can't afford to be scared to speak up, for I am the leader. Why? Because the future of Samoa depends on this government. The courts have caused the problem with no solution in sight. So here is my solution. Hear our appeal.
Fast Deputy Tuala dismissed Tuilaepa's comments as nothing more than a desperate attempt to cling on to power.
Well, he's got nothing on his side. He doesn't have the majority. He doesn't have the numbers. He doesn't have the law on his side. All he's got is the leftover power that he's trying to maintain, which he doesn't have anymore. So whatever he tries to do now, it'll be illegal.
But with neither side budging, the question asked by many is, how will this end? The Director of Samoan Studies at the National University of Samoa, Leasiulangi Malaysia Malama Malaysia, is calling for traditional leaders to take a stance.
From the cultural perspective, I think I'd like to see the Whāta Māinga family get together and have a chat, see what could happen to try and calm things down from that side of things, ensure that the country can understand that some sense of leadership is there and some concern about the country's welfare and peace and so on.
After the drama of yesterday, today the country's politics seem to be in an awkward stasis. No dramatic shift, no side backing down, uncertainty still the prevailing mood. For Checkpoint, ko Jamie Tahana aho.
It's 5:45. I'm Lisa Owen, and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. He muriaki e ngā pitapita kōrero. After the news at 6, Aucklanders prepare to cough up more for rates. The government has paused the quarantine-free travel bubble with Victoria because of community cases in Melbourne. The pause will come into effect from 7:59pm tonight and will be in place for 72 hours. Meanwhile, Melbourne is once again in the middle of a race against time to beat a COVID outbreak. From tonight, new restrictions are coming into place in Melbourne, including mandatory face masks and limits to gatherings. The ABC's Sarah Sedgey reports.
Victorians have lived relatively free from COVID for 3 months, but now the emergence of a cluster in Melbourne's northern suburbs has again put the state on high alert. 4 family members across 3 households have been affected, and now there's been another addition. Victoria's acting Premier is James Merlino.
This new case is a male in his 60s who we are linking to the City of Whittlesea outbreak. Importantly, he reports being symptomatic before case 1 developed symptoms, meaning this could be a possible source case.
Genomic testing has revealed this cluster's links to a case a few weeks ago, when a man completed hotel quarantine in South Australia, only to later test positive in Melbourne. This latest case could be the link between him and the new cluster. Professor Nancy Baxter is head of the School of Population and Global Health at the University of Melbourne.
What this helps us do is determine where these cases that were identified yesterday came from. So there was no obvious connection of the 4 cases from yesterday to the traveller who acquired it in hotel quarantine. So this allows us to kind of start tracking it back to figure out where it came from. Now, we're not sure whether the case that was identified overnight is the one that links it back to the traveller. It may be that there's another person in between. So it's going to be very, very important over the next few days to understand how far this is spread.
That report from the ABC's Sarah Sedgey. And in breaking news in the past few minutes, Victoria has recorded another 4 COVID-19 infections, bringing the Melbourne cluster to 9. The 4 new cases confirmed this afternoon are all family contacts of the most recent case, a man in his 60s. A former inmate at Christchurch Women's Prison is hopeful a new program to connect wahine with their culture will help cut down the number returning to prison. Corrections Minister Kelvin Davis was in Otatahi today to talk about the extension of the Wahine Māori Pathways program, thanks to an extra $10 million in last week's budget. Conan Young and VJ Nathan McKinnon went along.
A warm welcome for Kelvin Davis as he arrived at Christchurch Women's Prison, with inmates performing a haka that nearly took the roof off.
Access to your culture is a right, not a privilege. Can they come with me? I need that.
The audience receptive as he explained what the new government funding is for.
So access to your culture is a right, not a privilege, and people shouldn't be denied their culture or access to their language just because they're in prison.
But a speech by former inmate Irene Whittaker really stole the show.
I know what it's like to sit in a cell for days on end. I know what it's like to sit in those dark moments. But you have to find the peace inside you. And you'll only get that when when you can have gratitude. But you're not going to be grateful for the things in prison when you're left locked in a cell.
She turned her life around and now manages the Drug and Alcohol Rehabilitation Centre, Odyssey House. For Irene, reconnecting with her culture helped get her life on a better track.
When you believe you're only good at breaking the law, or you don't know how to ground yourself because you're feeling anxious. Well, in my Māoridom, when I'm anxious, I karakia. So that will ground me. One of the things that really helped me was knowing that I never stand alone. All of the people that have gone before me are with me. that was a game changer for me because I always felt isolated and alone.
She played a major part in tailoring the Pathways program for Christchurch Women's and says including whānau in prisoners' rehabilitation is right up there with educating them about their culture. Irene recalls how normal prison became to her and how wanting to break the cycle for the sake of her whānau became a great motivating force in her life.
Being in prisons for me happened from a young age, visiting, seeing whānau in prison, and then eventually I went to prison, and then my children started going to prison. However, in 2011, my first granddaughter was born in November, and when they brought her into this prison to see me, I swore that would never happen again. I was released in February 2012 and I've never come back.
She has this message for anybody wondering if the Pathways program is for them.
Actually, most of the prison sentences I did, the only thing available was a tikanga course. And all the Māori girls would go to the tikanga course and I wouldn't. The reason I wouldn't go was because I was scared of being who I am. The reason I didn't go was because I thought I should know. I thought I should know how to haka, how to waiata. I thought I should know how to be Māori, but I never allowed myself to be Māori. So if you have the opportunity to be Māori in prison, my message to you is push yourself past the fear and go and do it. It may be the thing that will save your life.
Kei ōtou tahi ahau mō te hōtaka o te ahi, ko Conan Young tēnei.
Black Cap Tim Seifert has tearfully shared his experience of contracting COVID-19 in India, preventing him from returning to New Zealand. The 26-year-old is back home now and is going through managed isolation after a spell in a private hospital in India. He tested positive just hours before he was due to join other Black Caps on charter flights home when the Indian Premier League was called off. Here's Clay Wilson with more.
Tim Seifert thought nothing of a minor cough as he eagerly packed his bags for a next-day flight out of COVID-ravaged India. But excitement quickly turned to emotions of a different kind when he was told his last test before departure had come back positive.
My heart sank straight away, really, and then I just went up to my room while everything kind of got sorted out. You know, the New Zealand boys and other overseas players got another test done. They all were negative, and they were managed to go home. And that was kind of when it all sunk in, really, is when everyone left. And I was the only overseas player basically still left in India. So that's when things got a little bit real.
Seifert got transferred into a private hospital, where he stayed until he returned a negative test. With India buckling under the pressure of the pandemic and oxygen for COVID patients at a premium, the Black Caps' keeper batsman is thankful his symptoms remained mild. And although he's physically recovered, Seifert is still dealing with the mental toll of almost 4 weeks straight in hotel quarantine and the reality he found himself in.
Kind of the world stops a little bit. I just couldn't really think what was next. And that was the scary part of it, is you hear about the bad things. And, you know, I thought that was going to happen to me. So, yeah, no, it was tough.
Support from various corners helped Seifert relax and get through. In particular, he says former Black Caps captains Brendan McCullum and Stephen Fleming, both coaches of IPL teams, proved invaluable. Reflecting on his decision to go to India in the first place, Seifert says at that time the risk seemed minimal.
You only kind of heard good things, structures and all the plans had been put in place. So that was a good point of view from a player to go over there. And to be honest, the whole time while I was over there, the bubble felt good. Felt safe, the structures were put in place well, and then I'm not sure how COVID got into our bubble.
For now, anyway, it's not something he'll be giving too much thought. Seifert says freedom, family and his upcoming nuptials are what's on his mind, with his long-awaited release from hotel isolation due to come in around a week's time.
Looking forward to that, and the wedding's coming up, so Morgs, my fiancée, will be happy for me to get going and doing some planning because I haven't done too much, so she'll be happy about that.
One suspects those close to Tim Seifert are just happy to have him back after the realities of COVID-19 struck all too close to home. For Checkpoint, Clay Wilson.
Cycling activists who installed a pop-up bike lane of one of Wellington's busiest roads are promising more of the same until the council ups its game. The pop-up cycleway, crafted using plant boxes, was first installed on Monday morning until contractors turned up to take it down. But this morning, the plants were back for a short period at least. Our reporter Kirsty Frame and cameraman Dom Thomas have more.
For the rush hour this morning, the bike lane was back. The short 100-metre stretch of what is normally car parks was converted into a bike path, separated from the road by planter boxes. Jonathan Coppard helped construct them out of wooden pallets and filled them with a layer of metal and then bark.
Good luck even kicking one of them over. You'd really struggle. They're a two-person lift. We wanted them to be solid so that they would actually give cyclists real protection. A lot of bike lanes just have paint and it doesn't really do anything.
The bike lane was first installed yesterday, but in the afternoon council contractors came along and disassembled it by moving the pot plants onto the path. This morning, not to be deterred, volunteers from Cycle Wellington returned and moved the boxes back onto the street. So what's the point behind all of this? Patrick Morgan is from Cycling Action Network.
Last week was Road Safety Week. Unfortunately, 2 cyclists died last week because we've been too slow to build safe streets. Our message to the council is pull your finger out, do what you say you're going to do, and deliver a safe cycling network within 10 years.
Not wanting to extend this particular tit-for-tat any longer, the activists took the plant boxes away just after 9. But Morgan is warning this isn't the end.
We can build these pop-up bike lanes anywhere. Today we're back in Berempore. Next week, who knows where we'll be. This is going to keep happening until the council commits to delivering safe streets.
Wellingtonians had mixed views on the bike lane and wider concerns about cycling safety in the city.
But I think if you don't have proper planning, you don't take into account road safety or the rest of it, you have an issue. I mean, the same way, even where there are cycleways, and this is my personal bugbear, a lot of cyclists still don't use them. They still cycle on the footpath, not the cycleway. Why is beyond me.
I mean, yeah, I guess there is safety implications of it as well. But anything to get more cars off the road, getting people back into bikes, even if they are adaptable laneways and whatnot. If pedestrians are safe and the cyclists are safe, then for sure it's fantastic.
I would say I feel very unconfident riding on my bike around Wellington, mainly because I guess buses, extensive traffic, things like that. And yeah, I guess there's not enough cycleways for cyclists that are safe.
The Wellington City Council spokesperson, Richard McLean, says it has been talking to the group both today and yesterday, and the council wants to resolve the matter.
We just want to actually have an adult conversation and say, look, we know what your frustrations are all about, but we, as an organisation that is in charge of keeping the roads safe, we can't let this keep going on because it's actually causing danger.
The council is promising to spend more than ever before on cycleways. In their upcoming long-term plan, which will be finalised on Thursday, there is a proposal to spend $120 million on bike lanes. But it's not the most ambitious option, and cycling advocates want them to invest $100 million extra, which would see a complete network. Mō te hotaka o te ahipo nei, ko Kirsty Frame tēnei.
A number of you have been getting in touch around liquor licensing, and this is the call we had earlier in the program from the National Māori Authority. It wants, a moratorium on new bottle store licences nationwide. And a few of you agree. This person says, I've worked in nightlife for close to 2 decades. It's always been the exact same thing. Alcohol stores are cheap. The amount of stores is completely irrelevant, this person says, and bars are expensive. Kids try to drink as much as possible at home to buy less at bars, get too drunk, often get denied entry and start a fight. Make alcohol stores more expensive. It's as simple as that, they say. Another person says residents of Kandala opposed a bottle store setting up in our suburb last year and won. No lawyers, no days off work, just numbers of residents lodging objections. Another person said to just ban all alcohol from the supermarkets. Someone else agrees, saying liquor industry and supermarkets dominate the licensing system. Ordinary people on the street have very little chance of appealing any new licences.
RNZ News at 6, ngā mihi nui, ko Susana Leata tēnei. The files sent to media outlets from a group claiming to have hacked the Waikato DHB appear to contain sensitive patient information. Scores of official-looking records and documents containing names, phone numbers and addresses of patients and staff have been released.
A few individual records are among what's been sent out, alongside screenshots identifying hundreds of other patients and staff. Some spell out diagnoses, charts of body vital signs and medicines provided. Also, there's a 4-page criminal history and a copy of a driver's licence. In 2 cases, letters of job offers to staff spell out the salary. RNZ is taking care to limit how the information is accessed, and it is not connected to a network. Ko Phil Pennington, aho.
Air New Zealand is cancelling 20 flights over the next 72 hours because of the pause of quarantine-free travel with Victoria. The airline says flights from Auckland to Melbourne will operate as normal, but direct flights from Wellington, Christchurch and Queenstown will be cancelled. Passengers on those flights will be transferred to Auckland. One flight from Melbourne to Auckland will arrive before the pause comes into effect tonight. However, a flight from Melbourne to Wellington has been cancelled because it was due to land after 8. Qantas and Jetstar are also assessing the impact of the pause on their schedules. New Zealand has expressed a willingness to offer support to Samoa as the island nation grapples with political turmoil. It's calling on all parties to uphold the rule of law and respect the democratic process. Here's our political editor, Jane Patterson.
New Zealand says it's not in a position to intervene but does stand ready to help if required. However, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs declined to answer a direct question about whether it recognises yesterday's swearing-in ceremony as legal and official. In a statement, it says New Zealand respects Samoa's sovereignty and the mana of its democratic institutions. Furthermore, it says it recognises the combined wisdom and experience of traditional and church leaders who'll want to see a peaceful outcome, and New Zealand looks forward to working with a democratically elected government. From Parliament, Jane Patterson.
A man who planted a spy camera in the changing room of an Auckland gym used his position to get name suppression. Philip Barnes filmed people naked or partially dressed at least 4 times in November 2017. Last year, he was promoted to Chief Executive of International Accreditation New Zealand and argued in the District Court, where he was discharged without conviction, that naming him would disrupt the agency's role in the pandemic response. But 2 higher courts disagreed, and the Supreme Court refused another appeal, meaning he can be named today. The Accreditation Council says it was unaware of Barnes's crime or the suppression argument. A conviction was entered in the High Court after police appealed. The National Māori Authority wants a halt on all new liquor licences following a spate of violent attacks in city centres. Māori wardens patrolling Auckland CBD at weekends are reporting more and more violent attacks. The authority chair, Matthew Tukaki, says the country already has more than 14,000 liquor outlets, and that's plenty to service the population.
The way that young people are getting themselves into blues with each other and blues with others is absolutely astounding. But more importantly, we're seeing young women in particular, if Māori wardens and even if police hadn't have stepped in, it could have led to other extreme sorts of violence.
Meanwhile, a Court of Appeal hearing is set down for next month on Auckland Council's proposal for a 2-year freeze on off licences in the CBD. The government hopes that small businesses will get better access to digital technology training through a new public-private partnership. The 20-member Digital Boost Alliance was launched in Auckland this afternoon. It involves organisations like Google, Facebook, Microsoft, Chorus and 2 Degrees, the Warehouse Group and the Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment. The Minister for Small Business, Stuart Nash, says the 20 organisations are committed to offering support to businesses and workers with free or discounted goods, services, advice or training. The Director General of the Department of Conservation, Lou Sanson, is leaving after 8 years in the role. His contract was already extended by 2 years after he served 2 3-year terms, which is standard for the heads of government departments. Mr Sanson plans to work in environmental and social governance and will be volunteering with the Predator-Free 2050 movement and the Backcountry Trust. He will step down in September. It's 5 minutes past 6. The Black Caps cricketer Tim Seifert believes the risks were minimal when he decided to go to India for the IPL. After being stranded in the COVID-ravaged country having contracted the virus, the wicket-keeper batsman is finally back home and going through managed isolation. The postponement of the IPL and his subsequent time in India after testing positive has given Seifert a chance to reflect on his call to be part of the tournament in the first place.
You only kind of heard good things, structures and all the plans had been put in place. So that was a good point of view from a player to go over there. And to be honest, the whole time while I was over there, the bubble felt good, felt safe. The structures were put in place well. And then I'm not sure how COVID got into our bubble.
Meanwhile, continual rain in Southampton has forced the Black Caps to cut their inter-squad game from 3 to 2 days to allow them to get some outdoor training. The game was scheduled to start in Southampton tomorrow night. The Black Caps are yet to train outdoors because of the weather. Champion New Zealand mare Melody Bell has sold for nearly $3 million at auction on Australia's Gold Coast. The 6-year-old was bought for $57,500 in 2016 before going on to win over $4 million in prize money. She broke Sunline's record for most Group 1 wins by a New Zealand-trained horse with her 14th race win at Ellerslie earlier this year. And Max Mosley, the former head of Formula One's governing body, has died aged 81. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, Trevor Reiki celebrates the music and legacy of Robert Johnson. And possibly the most important recording sessions made so far, Auckland University astrophysicist Nicholas Rattenbury is raising the bar on the possibility of life beyond planet Earth, while Johns Hopkins International Relations Assistant Professor Nina Hall is back home in Bologna, but wants to talk German politics ahead of that nation's post-COVID election. On Nights of me, Brian Crump, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Northland, Auckland, Coromandel Peninsula, Bay of Plenty, Taupo and Taihape. Partly cloudy, the odd shower for Great Barrier Island and eastern parts of Northland, Coromandel and Taihape. Southeasterly, strong in exposed places. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay mostly cloudy with occasional showers. Southeasterlies, strong in exposed places. Waikato to Kapiti, including Waitomo and Taumaranui, mainly fine. Some cloudy periods in Manawatu and Kapiti. For Wellington and Wairarapa, cloudy periods. Isolated showers clearing from Wellington tonight and Wairarapa tomorrow morning. For all of the South Island except Fiordland, generally fine. Some cloudy periods about coastal Marlborough. Frosty tonight, a few areas of morning cloud or fog tomorrow. Fiordland, cloud gradually increasing. Late drizzle about the fiords tomorrow. And Chatham Islands, fine spells. RNZ National, it's 8 minutes past 6.
Thanks, Susanna. No mai hoki mai. If you're just joining us, this is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. A group claiming responsibility for the cyber attack on Waikato DHB is circulating a sample of the private files they claim to have harvested. The information has been sent to several media outlets, saying the clock is ticking on the District Health Board. RNZ has forwarded the information on to police. Well, joining me now to discuss these developments is AUT Computer Sciences Professor Dave Parry. Hi, Dave. This is clearly not contained, is it?
Well, this will all have happened in the initial attack. So what's happening now is we're seeing that the ransom demanders are drip feeding information in the hope that they will actually get paid out. So there won't be anything new happen. It will just be from last week.
So the motivation in circulating it as they have is what?
Really, to put more pressure on to try and sort of push across to get the ransom, or more globally, show to other people who might be in the same position that they're prepared to do this, and those would be people who were possibly going to pay ransom, unlike New Zealand government, who's not going to.
What it does seem to tell us, Dave, is that they actually have got copies of this material because the DHB was hedging its bets there, wasn't it?
Yes, and the trouble is that you never know when they do these sort of attacks. They're getting in very quickly, and they're trying to get as much as they can in often quite a short length of time before they're detected. So it's often very unclear exactly what they've got, and it may be that something looks fairly credible, but in fact it's just one letter or something like that. It's not the whole data set that they're talking about. And so because the DHB won't know exactly which files have been deleted and which files have been encrypted or which files have been downloaded, that they can't really exactly say who's been affected. Part of the Privacy Act now, they will have to notify people if their privacy has been breached, but it's all very murky at the moment.
So, what power is there to contain this at this point?
Well, in terms of sort of using this data, the ISPs and the sort of the internet providers in New Zealand would certainly not allow this to be hosted or accessed from within New Zealand, and they're actually pretty effective at doing that. And international organisations generally would also do that as well. So the possibility, the real sort of issue would really be about personal details which could be used by fraudsters to contact patients or staff members and appear to know a lot about them and encourage them to do something like give up passwords or financial details or whatever.
Or approach them directly asking for money in order to keep their details secret.
Well, possibly, but that's probably that the size of these things is such that that's a lot of time they'd have to spend doing that. And again, I think vast majority of people would actually contact the police, and the police would be able to reassure people that certainly within the New Zealand context, it's very unlikely that anybody would actually be able to publish this in a way that would be up for any length of time at all. So it's obviously a horrible, horrible situation for people involved, potentially, and everybody's probably more worried about it now than what's going to come out, if anything does come out.
Are you able to glean anything more about the weaknesses in the Waikato DHB system, given what we now know, that they're still offline, essentially, and seemingly critical equipment like radiography equipment has been taken down as well? What does that tell us about the way their system is set up?
Well, like lots of the DHBs and lots of large organisations, these systems have been built up from relatively disparate and small parts over time, and trying to sort of rebuild something when there's been a major attack is actually very difficult, because you have to make sure that everything lines up. So you don't want to have the data in one system not corresponding to the data in something else. And particularly with health systems, you certainly don't want to think that you've restored everything and you've missed something out. So, for example, if you're thinking about blood tests or something like that, you don't want to have restored what you think is everything and there's still a critical blood test that you haven't restored, because that's the most dangerous thing that could happen.
Appreciate your time this evening. That's Professor Dave Parry from AUT's School of Computer Sciences. Aucklanders will have to cough up more on their rates bill over the next decade, with the Super Cities Council voting through increases today. The Finance Committee today hashed out its 10-year budget, which aims to plug the $750 million fiscal hole punched by the COVID-19 pandemic. It's also set aside billions of dollars for infrastructure and climate change. Jean Bell was there.
Dubbed the Recovery Budget, Auckland Council's 10-year spending plan lays out rates increases and a big infrastructure boost. Aucklanders will pay a one-off 5% rates increase next year, about $147 on average. This is followed by an average 3.5% yearly increase through to 2031. The council will be funneling $31.8 billion into infrastructure for the growing city, while upping climate change action by $152 million. Mayor Phil Goff says the council chose not to slash spending and cut services in the face of the pandemic.
We've actually done the reverse and said what we can do in this budget is that we can assist the recovery of this country from the COVID-19 recession and crisis. And that's exactly what we're doing in this budget.
He says infrastructure maintenance and renewal funding increased by 50% compared to the previous 10-year budget.
It's not the sort of stuff that attracts a lot of attention, unless, of course, your infrastructure starts to fail. And who hasn't watched the plight of Wellington and felt for Wellington as its wastewater, its stormwater and its freshwater pipes have exploded in the streets because they are long past the need for renewal. We are not going to allow that to happen in our city.
The council has also increased its borrowing ability and is selling off underutilised properties to help balance the books. Phil Goff says the council has a responsibility to be financially prudent without placing unreasonable burden on ratepayers.
We're conscious that for some, this could add to the financial pressures they already face.
Councillors Sharon Stewart, Wayne Walker, Greg Sayers and John Watson voted against the one-off 5% increase. John Watson says it's not just Aucklanders in lower socio-economic positions that are struggling.
A lot of people are under real strain, we know that, and not just the poor sections of our community. Many businesses and more affluent households are leveraged to the max, are under considerable financial pressure.
He thinks the council needs better ways of filling its coffers.
The borrow, sell and rate model is not sustainable and certainly not in the way it has been used over the last decade.
But Councillor Desley Simpson says continued investment in the region's infrastructure is vital.
If we stop investment and just keep our libraries open and pick up the rubbish, we will not be able to deal with infrastructure challenges, we will not be able to renew our ageing assets, or not able to deliver to meet population growth. And the impacts of not doing those things will take Auckland backwards.
She says the one-off 5% increase would help cover the cost of the City Rail Link and the Central Interceptor, a supersized wastewater tunnel running from Grey Lynn to the Mangere wastewater treatment plant that will help reduce overflows.
Our two mammoth infrastructure investment projects couldn't have come at a worse time for us. That large investment associated with those projects has landed at the same time as the need for us to respond to the challenges of COVID-19.
But Desley Simpson says the Super City isn't relying on ratepayers to foot the bill, with public contribution no more than 40% of the council's revenue. She says Auckland's rates increases are lower than other councils, such as Tauranga and Wellington. Mō te hōtaka o te ahi nei, ko Jean Bell TNA.
It is 17 minutes past 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Workers say new hope has been breathed into Dunedin's Hillside Railway Workshop after a major redevelopment was unveiled today. The government announced $85 million to build a new wagon assembly facility in last month's budget. It follows nearly $20 million already earmarked from the Provincial Growth Fund in 2019 to upgrade two main rail workshops. Reporter Tess Brunton was at the unveiling in Dunedin and filed this report.
Less than a decade ago, the future of Dunedin's Hillside Railway Workshop looked bleak. Roughly 90 staff were laid off and the workshop was mostly closed down. But today, the mood was buoyant as a major upgrade was revealed. It translates to a new mechanical workshop, a new wagon assembly facility where Kiwi Rail expects to assemble at least 1,500 wagons over 3 years, new shared offices, workshops, equipment and a visual revamp of its site. Kiwi Rail Group Chief Executive Greg Miller is over the moon.
It's phenomenal. You know, we've got 7 people here that went through the shutdown that have been here for nearly 45 years. So they've seen every manner of change at Hillside. So this morning's meeting was ecstatic. We've got 55 people employed here now, and a lot of those are cadets and apprentices as well, male and female. But the meeting we had today to explain the transition, there was a huge amount of positive energy, a lot of gratitude.
The project uses funding from the budget and the Provincial Growth Fund. Roughly 250 construction jobs will be needed for the rebuild, and Kiwi Rail will take on at least 45 new staff for the wagon assembly itself. Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern says that means New Zealand will be producing wagons instead of importing them fully assembled.
By assembling here, that gives us assurances around quality, that gives us a training pipeline so that we have those who are here assembling also part of the maintenance network. And I would push back hard on anyone who would say that it's a better decision to have that work all done offshore. There are some things that need to be done here in New Zealand, and this is one of them.
Kiwi Rail has committed to at least 10% of its new workers being apprentices or trainees.
On my last visit here to Hillside last year, I met some of the young apprentices. One of them was a young woman who herself approached Hillside repeatedly asking for the opportunity to become an apprentice. There are young people who want these opportunities. Our job is to create them.
Team leader Gary Dalzell has been at Hillside for 41 years, describing it as a family.
It's always great to come to work, reconnect, have a bit of a joke, that sort of thing. But when in 2012 we've become even a tight-knit family when there's only 7 of us, having to keep the flag raising, so to speak. Yeah, but now going to this is just awesome.
Mechanical engineer Chris Harkness has a family connection to the workshop.
My father used to work here, so I used to come in here with him when I was able to. When I was at age, I used to come in and help him out, and I always wanted to come here. Sadly, when this place closed in a way in 2012, it means I couldn't come here, but since I managed to 2.5 years ago, it's been great. We now basically want to carry off where I wanted to be.
For Chris Harkness, the upgrade gives him more certainty. Lisa Kelly is the daughter of former Rail and Maritime Union National President Jim Kelly, who spent years fighting for Hillside workers. She was honoured to stand in his stead when he couldn't attend.
But I'm also excited. You know, I remember being here as a little girl. I came here. My dad brought me to have a look round, and it's amazing, and it's going to really boost South Dunedin, and I'm just really excited about it, really.
A staged demolition will begin this year, with a new site expected to be operational by the end of 2023. In Dunedin for Checkpoint, Cortes Brunton, TNA.
Victoria has recorded another 4 COVID-19 infections, bringing the Melbourne cluster to 9. The government here has suspended the quarantine-free travel bubble with Victoria for at least 72 hours. Melbourne's also bringing back some restrictions, including mandatory face masks and limits to gathering. The 4 new cases confirmed this afternoon are all family contacts of the most recent case, a man in his 60s. University of Melbourne epidemiologist Tony Blakely joins me now. Hi, Tony. The speed of spread here, what would you say about that? Yesterday there's 2, now we've got 9.
Yeah, so things have changed dramatically in the last 90 minutes with these extra 4 cases. These 4 cases are parallel, if you like, with the case that was found this morning. Now, that's good. They're all in the same household, so that makes you feel a bit confident. But the downside here is that this person, the 5th case this morning, actually probably passed it on to the most recent cases a week ago. So if these other 4 people in the household have also had their infection for a week and they've all been out in the community to different places, we have a problem on our hands. We don't yet know that. That type of information will be being worked through right now by the Chief Health Officer and the Victorian Government team. But it's just become somewhat more concerning, the situation in Melbourne in the last 90 minutes.
So the man in his 60s, identified this afternoon, he is actually what they think is the first cab off the rank. But what do we know about where he got it from?
Well, this is the thing. We are hoping that one of those 5 people, because I think we have to treat them as parallel infections now, but one of those 5 people we hope is a connection back to the person who came out of South Australian quarantine and to the We haven't
just
yet
lost you there, Tony. Sorry, just very briefly, you dropped out there. So you were saying they hope that this person is in some way connected with a quarantine case?
Yes, so we know that this started based on genomic testing from a case that caught the virus in quarantine in South Australia and then came to Victoria on the 4th of May. What we're trying to do is find the person that picked it up from that first case, and we're hoping it's one of the 5 people in this family that was that person who then transferred it on. If we haven't found that person, then we've got more of a situation because there must be other undetected infection out there. So there's a lot of detection work to do overnight and a lot more contact tracing and testing to do in the next couple of days.
Do you think then, given what you've just said, that the containment measures that they've brought back in, is that going to be enough to keep it under control in the meantime?
I certainly agreed with them up until 90 minutes ago, but with these extra 4 cases that might have been infected for some days, I'm not so sure. And I'm sure that that's exactly the sort of arithmetic and logic they're working through now. If I was the Chief Health Officer and these extra 4 cases had pretty much the same contacts as the other family member, the 60-year-old male who who was co-infected with them, I'd be more confident. But if these 5 people in this household all had quite different patterns of moving around the neighbourhood and have been in contact with people that are not currently in quarantine, then I would be quite concerned, and I would be, if I was the Chief Health Officer, putting in more restrictions tomorrow. I'm not privy to that data. That's just what I would be doing if I was the Chief Health Officer right now.
What extra checks and balances? Because they can still mingle with 50 people on a social occasion and have 5 people in their house for a visit.
Right, so we've already got masks on and we've reduced gatherings in private residences. Next places to go are to reduce gathering size in cafes, bars and restaurants, to start reducing sizes or even making no crowds at sporting events, to encourage people to work at home if they can, and then beyond that you start getting into what we would call a lockdown, whereby you've got layers of lockdown. Now, I'm not trying to say that that's where we're heading, but there's got to be a careful decision-making overnight about those possibilities.
So you're actually feeling, it seems, a little bit more nervous than when we last talked to you when there was another case that popped up. So I asked you that time about the travel bubble, right? We've suspended it now, New Zealand, for 72 hours. This time, do you think that's the right move?
Well, again, up until 90 minutes ago, I thought it was preemptive and too cautionary. Given the information we've learned in the last 90 minutes, I think it's appropriate. So I do think that is a precautionary approach that's appropriate, and I wouldn't be surprised if other states and territories in the next couple of hours move to at least ban, for want of a better word, people from the northern suburbs of Melbourne travelling interstate.
Appreciate your time tonight. That's Professor Tony Blakely, who's an epidemiologist with the University of Melbourne. A new study shows we may be underestimating the impacts of climate change on animals, with Australian researchers saying one example is how higher temperatures are making flies infertile. The ABC's Nick Grimm reports.
Well, this is Outback Australia. Look at these flies.
When the mercury climbs and a hot, dry air mass blows out of inland Australia, swarms of flies usually aren't far behind.
Yeah, try not to eat too many. But if you get stuck, I think you'd get a feed off of these fellas.
And while they might seem to flourish in the heat of the Australian summer, like any living creature, even they have their limits, something that prompted Professor Ari Hoffman from the University of Melbourne to examine how global warming will affect them.
Look, we're interested in this general question, this more general question, which is all about, what dictates whether species are going to do, badly or well under climate change. Flies are just a good way of looking at that, because you can look at a lot of species at once.
And in a troubling finding, the international team of researchers discovered that relatively minor increases in temperature causes flies to, stop making little flies. The fertility of male flies starts declining when temperatures rise above 30 degrees.
And in fact, we were quite surprised because the fertility is potentially up to 4 or 5 degrees more sensitive. So in other words, when you've got a temperature that affects fertility, it's actually 4 degrees lower or 5 degrees lower than a temperature that kills the flies. And that's a massive difference.
So as you turn up the temperature, the desire to procreate reduces?
Not so much the desire. I'm sure the desire is still there, but just the ability to actually do it. Because what this is showing is that the fertility of the males really declines at high temperatures.
And that's a big problem, Ari Hoffman says, because while flies might be really, really annoying, they also serve some pretty critical functions, such as helping pollinate plants and control pests.
And they are very, very important in terms of breaking down rotting fruit and rotting vegetation and those sorts of things. So flies, there are hundreds of species of flies, thousands actually, and they have these very, very useful functions in our ecosystems. But, of course, these flies are simply showing what's happening much more generally to our animals.
That kind of makes them like the proverbial canaries in the coal mine.
Look, from an experimental point of view, I guess you could say that. We know that some mammals, for instance, we do get some problems with fertilisation when temperatures get warm. There's quite a lot of data from cows, for instance. We have evidence in corals that when things get warm, and then potentially the sperm bundles are affected by the heat. We have evidence from plants even that some of the fertilisation that happens in plants can be affected by heat.
I guess the other big question too, does this have implications for human reproductive health?
So I think as a species we are much better at avoiding these sorts of extreme conditions. But having said that, of course, it is possible that sperm function in our species, like in other mammals, could be affected by heat. It's certainly a possibility. So I'm not going to speculate on this too far, but I think it's, again, something that's worth looking at.
And that was the ABC's Nick Grimm with that report. That's all we've got time for tonight. Back tomorrow.